The Buddha did not gain anything the night he sat under that tree. He lost something. Every version of this story you have heard describes a man who received cosmic knowledge, who was filled with light, who achieved the highest state a human being can reach. The Pali word for what actually happened means none of those things. The word means waking up, and the difference between being enlightened and waking up is not poetry. It is the difference between adding something to your life and removing something that has been fermenting inside your mind for as long as you have been alive. And it explains why, after it happened, he almost kept it to himself. He was 35 years old and he was dying, not from disease, from effort. For 6 years, Siddhartha Gautama had done everything the holy men of ancient India told him would lead to liberation. He stopped eating 1 sesame seed a day, 1 grain of rice. His ribs pressed through his skin. His spine was visible through his stomach. He meditated until his teeth cracked from the pressure of his own jaw. He held his breath until he collapsed. And nothing happened. 6 years of adding more discipline, more pain, more renunciation, and he was no closer to freedom than the day he left his father's palace. Then a woman named Sujata walked toward a shrine near the Narangara River, carrying a bowl of rice milk. She was not looking for a monk. She was making an offering to a tree spirit. What she found was a skeleton sitting upright. She offered him the food. He ate. His 5 companions, the men who had starved beside him for 6 years, watched him lift the bowl to his mouth, and they left. They called him a failure. They said he had returned to luxury. He was alone. 2,500 years later, a meditator at a 10-day Vipassana retreat described reaching the same wall. Day 7, he wrote, "I simply could not meditate, and in that failure, he saw something he had missed for years. There was no one to meditate. The one doing the seeking was the thing in the way." That night, with no teacher, no method, no companions, and nothing left to add, he sat down under an Assattha tree. And what happened next has been mistranslated for 150 years. In 1879, a German scholar named Max Müller sat in an office at Oxford University and did something that would shape how the entire Western world understood the Buddha. He translated the Pali word bodhi, and he got it wrong. He chose the word enlightenment. It was not a careless choice. It was a precise one. Precise for the wrong reason. Müller was a product of the European Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. In his world, the highest human achievement was the acquisition of knowledge, the triumph of rational light over darkness. So when he encountered a word that described the Buddha's transformation, he reached for the metaphor he knew. Light entering a dark room, knowledge replacing ignorance, something gained. But the Pali root budh does not mean to illuminate. It does not mean to gain knowledge. It means to wake up. The way you wake up from sleep, not because someone handed you something, but because the dream stopped. That is not a small difference. Enlightenment implies something was added. Awakening implies something was removed. And once you hear that distinction, the entire story of what happened under that tree shifts direction. In 2022, researchers at Yale published a study on experienced meditators. They expected to find brains doing more activity, more connections, more processing power. What they found was the opposite, the default mode network. The part of your brain that constructs your sense of self, that narrates your past and rehearses your future, that tells you who you are 24 hours a day, had gone quiet. The brain was not doing more. It was doing less. 2,500 years earlier, the Buddha had a word for what those meditators experienced. He did not call it gaining insight. He did not call it achieving clarity. He called it waking up. And waking up, it turns out, is not about adding anything. It is about what happens when the noise finally stops. if this is already changing how you understand what happened that night. Subscribe to Dharma Made Simple. This channel exists because the real teachings are more useful than the popular versions, because what happened under that tree was not one moment of cosmic revelation. It was three distinct phases across a single night. And the third one, the one almost nobody talks about, is the one that actually set him free. The texts call it the Night of the Three Watches. In the Pali canon, the oldest surviving record of the Buddha's words, Siddhartha himself describes what happened, not through metaphor, not through mythology. He describes it the way a doctor describes a diagnosis. In the first watch of the night, he saw his own past, not a highlight reel, not a vision of golden temples. He saw lifetimes, thousands of them, birth after birth, death after death, the same patterns repeating, craving, grasping, losing, grieving, starting over. He saw himself as a merchant, a farmer, a king, an animal, a beggar, different names, different faces, the same mistake. Always adding, always reaching for the next thing that would finally be enough. It never was. In the second watch, his vision widened. He saw not just his own lives, but all beings, rising and falling according to their intentions, not punished by a cosmic judge, not rewarded by fate, simply experiencing the precise consequences of what they chose to grip and what they chose to release. A king who hoarded wealth, reborn into poverty. A servant who let go of resentment, reborn into peace, not magic, mechanics. And then the third watch. This is the one that matters most. This is the one the popular story almost always skips. The Pali word for what happened in the third watch is Asavakkhaya. English translators have struggled with it for centuries. They have called it the destruction of taints, the ending of defilements, the elimination of cankers. None of those translations land, because the word asava does not mean sin. It does not mean flaw. It means fermentation, the kind of fermentation that happens in a sealed container over a long time. Something brewing in the dark that you do not notice until it has saturated everything. The Buddha saw that his mind, every mind, contained these fermentations, three of them. The fermentation of sensory craving, the low hum that says this is not enough, try the next thing. The fermentation of becoming, the compulsion to build an identity, to be someone, to matter, and the fermentation of ignorance, not stupidity, but the simple failure to see things as they actually are. He did not fight them. He did not push them away. He saw them, and in the seeing, they dissolved, like opening a sealed container. The pressure releases not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped keeping it shut. This is Asavakkhaya, not the gaining of knowledge, not the arrival of light. The removal of something that had been fermenting so long he had mistaken it for himself. That is the detail almost everyone misses. The climax of the Buddha's awakening was not an addition. It was a subtraction. He did not become more. He became less. And what remained, when the fermentations cleared, was not a new thing. It was the thing that had been there all along, underneath everything he had piled on top of it. You know this feeling. Not from a monastery, from your own life. You have spent years adding credentials, adding routines, adding strategies for being happier, calmer, more productive, more complete, and somewhere underneath all of it, there is a quiet suspicion you have carried for a long time, the suspicion that the answer is not something you have not found yet. It is something you are already carrying that you do not need. The Buddha's word for that suspicion was right. You do not need to add light to see clearly. You need to pull back the curtains. The light was never absent. The curtains were, and then he did nothing. The texts describe the Buddha sitting under that tree for weeks after the night of the three watches. Not meditating, not planning, just sitting with what he had seen. And during that silence, he made a decision that nearly changed the course of human history. In the other direction, he decided not to teach. The Pali canon records his reasoning, and it is not what you would expect. He did not say the teaching was too sacred. He did not say humans were unworthy. He said something far more unsettling. He said it would be too hard, that this Dhamma, this truth, was too subtle, too deep, too against the current, that human beings are addicted to adding. They crave, they grip, they build, they accumulate, and what he had found was the opposite of all of that. He had found that freedom comes from removing, and he believed no one would understand. Think about that, the most profound realization in the history of human thought, and the man who had it sat in silence because he was convinced it was unteachable, not because it was complex, because it ran against every instinct humans have. You do not hesitate to give someone a gift, but you might hesitate to wake someone from a dream they prefer. Then Brahma Sahampati appeared. Whether you take this as mythology or metaphor does not change what happens next. Brahma looked at the silent Buddha and said one sentence that would alter everything. He said, "There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are falling away because they do not hear the Dhamma. Please teach." The Buddha did not answer immediately. The texts say he surveyed the world. He looked, not with his physical eyes, but with the clarity that remained after the fermentations had dissolved. And he saw that Brahma was right. Not everyone was ready, but some were. Some had only a thin layer of dust, and if he stayed silent, they would never know that what they had been searching for was not out ahead of them. It was underneath everything they were already carrying. He stood up. In 2012, Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin published research showing that long-term meditators undergo a specific structural change in the brain, the default mode network. The system that builds your autobiography, rehearses your future, maintains the running narrative of who you are, becomes less dominant, not destroyed, quiesced, and when it quiets, something emerges that Davidson's team did not expect. Not blankness, not emptiness, clarity, the kind of clarity that experienced meditators describe not as seeing something new, but as recognizing something that was always there. 8 centuries after the Buddha, a Japanese monk named Dogen described what happened that night in 3 words: casting off body-mind, not building a better mind. Casting off the one you mistook for yours. And when the curtains finally come down, you do not see something new. You see what was always there. That is why he did not call it enlightenment. He called it waking up. And waking up is not a destination. It is what happens when you stop walking in your sleep. He walked to a deer park near Varanasi. He found the 5 men who had abandoned him. And the first thing he taught them was not a prayer, not a ritual, not a technique for gaining anything. It was a diagnosis. He called it the 4 Noble Truths. And the first man to understand, a monk named Khandana, did not shout or weep or fall to his knees. The text says he simply saw. And the Buddha looked at him and said 2 words that echo across 25 centuries. Anasi Khandano. Khandana knows. He did not say Khandana achieved. He did not say Khandana gained. He said Khandana knows. Because the knowing was already there. It had always been there. Khandana just stopped blocking it. So here is what the Buddha actually found under that tree 2,500 years ago. First, the Pali word bodhi does not mean enlightenment. It means awakening. The entire Western framework, light entering darkness, knowledge replacing ignorance, something gained, is a translation error from 1879 that has shaped how hundreds of millions of people misunderstand what the Buddha experienced. He did not receive anything. He woke up. Second, the climax of that night was not a vision, not a revelation, not a mystical gift. It was Asavakkhaya, the destruction of fermentations. mental residue that had been brewing for so long it felt like identity. He did not add clarity. He removed what was blocking it. And you can begin that same process, not by finding the next book, the next course, the next retreat, the next version of yourself, but by asking a question you have probably been avoiding. What am I carrying that I do not need? Third, you are not someone who has not yet found the answer. You are someone who has been carrying the answer underneath everything you piled on top of it. Every strategy you added, every identity you built, every belief you gripped. They were not failures. They were the fermentations. And the moment you see them for what they are, they begin to dissolve. Not because you fought them, because you stopped keeping the container sealed. A Thai forest monk named Ajahn Chah once described enlightenment in 5 words. He said, just one more thing to let go of. Even the goal of waking up is something to release. Especially that. What is one thing you have been adding to your life that you suspect you might need to let go of instead? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If this changed how you see the Buddha's story, or your own, like this video, subscribe to Dharma Made Simple, and share it with someone who has been searching for a long time. Sometimes the most useful thing you can tell a person is, stop searching. You are already carrying what you need. You just need to set the rest of it down.